pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And we'll let Commissioner Long get situated. And that's all right. And Commissioner Johnson's just coming in, so we are doing great. All right. Madam Clerk, as soon as you're ready, I'm going to have you call the roll. Good morning. Good morning.
Chair Tremblay,
Here.
Vice Chair McDonald,
Here.
Commissioner Long,
Here.
Commissioner Bill de la Peña,
Present.
Commissioner Chavez,
Here.
Commissioner Edmonds,
Here.
Commissioner Enegren, present. Commissioner Huber,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Judge,
Here.
Commissioner Levere,
Here.
Commissioner Rollins,
Here.
Commissioner Sobel, Commissioner Wyrick,
Here.
Commissioner Tavares,
Here.
and no Board of Supervisor members shall be compensated to attend this VCTC Commission meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, it's time for public comments. Do we have any members of the audience who wish to offer a public comment on an item not on the agenda, or do we have anyone who has called in, Madam Clerk?
There are no public comments at this time.
No public comments. All right, very good. That finishes with item 4. Let's go to number 5, the Caltrans report. Commissioner Tavares, welcome aboard. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Tremblay, and good morning, Commissioners. I'm Tony Tavares. I'm the Caltrans Director for District 7, which oversees Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Few exciting points I'd like to share with the Commission this morning. Many of you are probably very well aware that Governor Newsom released his May revised budget proposal on May 13th, and very excited that there is quite a bit of additional funding for transportation, not only at the state level, but at the local level. A couple programs that really rise to the surface to me relates to the proposal of $500 million for active transportation projects, as well as free public transit for 3 months, and the governor is proposing $750 million for that as well. So excited to see the emphasis on transportation in the governor's proposal going forward. I also wanted to share a little bit about the upcoming Senate Bill 1 competitive programs, the Solutions for Congestion Relief, as well as the Trade Corridor Enhancement programs. The California Transportation Commission will be adopting guidelines for these 2 programs at their August 18th meeting. Soon after the adoption, they will open up the ability to receive applications for projects, and Caltrans will be very much involved with a lot of our local partners in developing and partnering on some of these applications. In addition to the guidelines that the CTC will provide, we're also looking at, when it comes to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, what freight issues are being addressed, as well as the benefits, or what freight benefits, and some of the areas we are also going to take a deeper dive is looking at the data to support those freight issues and benefits going forward. And as it comes to congestion relief as well, the SCCP program will be asking for basically how the congestion will be improved, how reliability on that roadway will be improved, as well as looking at the data to support the reduction in congestion as well as VMT reduction moving forward. So as we start going into cycle 3, and then after cycle 3, cycle 4, we are very much aligning these applications with CAPTI and the policies of the state and the federal government going forward for state and federal funding. And one last item I wanted to share relating to the federal program. On May 10th, Secretary Buttigieg announced the notice of funding opportunity that will come late this month in June for Reconnecting Communities grant program. We'll be providing $200 million, a combination of highway, contract authority, and advanced appropriations. So there's an opportunity there for reconnecting communities in that grant program. And then one last item wanted to mention as well as that the U.S. Department of Transportation is soliciting applications for $1 billion in grants for a new program really directed to cities and counties. The state DOTs cannot participate in this, so all the money is going to the local areas. And this is really for safety enhancement projects that will allow us to meet that Vision Zero concept moving forward. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes my comments this morning. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Commissioners. Do any Commissioners have questions for Mr. Tavares? Commissioner Long.
Thank you very much, and this might be for Mr. Tavares or Mr. Erickson. On the 3-month free bus rides, as we're looking at our budgets, is there built-in flexibility as to the timing frame that we use that, or can we do half and extend it for 6 months? Is there any flexibility in that funding? Does anyone know?
Commissioner Long, that's a good question. They're still working out the details for the 3 months free fare. We are hoping that they're going to allow maximum flexibility for transit agencies, both bus and rail, because that will help with the ultimate implementation. But as soon as we get more concrete details, we'll be sharing that with the Commission.
Okay, and the reason why I'm asking is I'm hoping that VCTC is weighing in on that to ask for it, because we know our cycles of when we get the most amount of use, like in September when school starts and so forth, and to fund that when we have the highest use, I think would be very useful for us.
We have active engagement with our partners at the state, both through the LC-TOP program, which, as you know, funds our college ride and will fund our Youth Pass program. And we also are actively involved with the California Transit Association and their activities in the state on behalf of all the transit operators. But we are particularly, and will continue to be particularly active with them.
Thank you. I think that's good for the commissioners to know. Thanks.
Any other questions for Commissioner Tavares? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated. All right, we'll move to item 6, Commissioners and Executive Director reports. Let me first turn to Commissioners and see if any of the Commissioners have reports other than what might be in the agency reports later on in the agenda. Commissioner Chavez. Commissioner Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to briefly give my thanks to VCTC staff. May 20th, the Oxnard Leadership Program through the West Ventura County Business Alliance had its session on land use and transportation. We had presenters from Gold Coast Transit District, VCTC, Metrolink, as well as from the city of Oxnard presenting on that day. Many of our participants were very excited to hear the information from VCTC, Metrolink, and Gold Coast Transit. And even a few of them even pledged to ride Metrolink, VCTC buses, as well as Gold Coast buses. So I just wanted to give my thanks to staff and their hard work as we are continuing to reach out to the public in new and innovative ways, and that we encourage more groups to come and learn more about our transportation here in Ventura County. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments from Commissioners? Commissioner Edmonds.
I also would like to thank VCTC. We had a mental health, because last month was Mental Health Month, and they provided transportation from Piru to Fillmore, so well done.
All right, any other comments? All right, time for the Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, happy June. I guess we're experiencing a little bit of June gloom today. Felt like it was raining a bit on my way in, but still a great June day. We had the budget in front of us, and I think a full but exciting agenda. The Executive Director's report is in front of you. I'll go over it quickly. We continue to get good participation in our Ventura County Comprehensive Transportation Plan, the CTP, or as we like to call our guiding document for VCTC's transportation future. And to date, we've received over 1,480 completed surveys and over 100 contributions to the interactive boards during the continuing pop-up events, which are going through local libraries, food banks, and other locations to better reach the disadvantaged communities. And some of the upcoming events are going to be at the Children of Many Colors Native American Powwow in Oxnard on June 3rd, and the Santa Paula Spring into Summer Festival on June 11th. We'd also like to acknowledge our appreciation for our continued partnership with the California Highway Patrol for our motorist aid program. CHP is an active and valued partner to the program, and also the Incident Responders Grants and Emergency Roadside Callbox program. I'm also excited to announce on June 17th, VCTC will be working with Gold Coast Transit and the other county operators to honor National Dump the Pump Day. So on that Friday, transit will be free, and we're hoping that will help encourage more people to utilize transit and take a little break from their cars and paying for gas. The 2022 updated Ventura County Bikeways map should be in front of you. I want to thank Amanda Fagan and her team for working on that. We also have we have many boxes of the updated maps, so please check in with us if you would like to have them delivered to your respective agencies or organizations that you are interested in. As you know, I was a bike to work person for 10 years in Oxnard, so I used this map extensively. I'm glad to see it updated, and I will hopefully get on my bike more, at least for the weekends. On June 1st, the City of Ventura hosted a virtual public workshop for the proposed Ventura Rail Trail. And this is important. Over 50 local residents participated in the workshop to provide input on the community connections and trail amenities. If funded through the state's active transportation program, Cycle 6, the project would design approximately a 4-mile section of the Santa Paula Branch Line Bike Trail from the East Ventura Montalvo Metrolink station to Saticoy. And VCTC provided background information and support to city staff and the consultant team, and our railroad operator, Sierra Northern, assisted the city with a site visit along the railroad line, and they shared feedback with the operator. So quickly on some exciting staff changes, we have a new staff person. I'd like to introduce Gaiska Velasquez. She's in the audience, sitting next to Peter DeHaan. She's filling the new program analyst position that was approved in last year's budget. Gaiska has a master's degree in city and regional planning from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, and she's previously worked in programming at the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, our sister agency a couple counties north. She also has done a variety of transportation planning work for different communities along the Central Coast. And based on her experience, we expect her to be a great resource for VCTC. Along the lines of exciting, I think, personnel changes, I'm happy to announce that Claire Grasty of VCTC has been selected to be VCTC's new Public Transit Director. And as Public Transit Director, she'll see all of VCTC's transit activities from rail to bus to our Regional Transit Information Center, the RTIC, and also the TDM and other work we do for commuter services and rideshare. Claire has a bachelor's in community studies from UC Santa Cruz, and she has a master's degree in public policy from CSU Northridge. And she has been in the transit business for quite a while. She was at Gold Coast Transit for 8 years before she came to VCTC, so we're also looking forward to that, I think, relationship being strengthened with her ascension to the public transit director role. And also, Darren Peshka of our staff just graduated from the Ventura County Leadership Academy on May 12th. As many of you know, that's a very important course, a series of courses and I think leadership training that occur in our county. So we appreciate her taking the time to do that. And then finally, I want to let the Commission know that I will be out of the office on vacation from June 12th through June 25th. And during that time, I've asked Amanda Fagan, our Director of Planning and Sustainability, to be the acting executive director. So, sorry for the long presentation, but we have a lot going on, and I'm open to any questions.
I'm the one who usually is used to making the long presentations, but thank you, Mr. Erickson. Let's see, Commissioner McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to compliment Mrs. Grasty for her promotion. Job well done. And the addition of Ms. Velasquez to our staff. It's the work that you do and the quality of work that you all do as staff that allow us to sit up here and do the things that we need to do. And for that, I'm very, very appreciative. So I think we should ask for a 10-year contract of not going anywhere else, but I'm told that's not legal anymore. So
I've explored that option. It's tricky.
thank you to all the staff. We have excellent staff, excellent people working here. So it's all a team effort, and without you, we wouldn't survive. So thank you all very much. Congratulations to you also.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Long.
Thank you. I've been checking out this bike lanes, and to have it online is fabulous as well, with the GIS mapping and so forth. I think that'll be a big benefit for our community, because it's not always that you stop and pull out a map and you're riding your bike and start looking at this. So to have it online is very good. So appreciate the technology. Thank you.
All right, and just a few quick comments. First of all, Ms. Velasquez, welcome aboard. We're really delighted to have you. Ms. Grasty, very well-deserved promotion. Echo what Commissioner McDonald has said. We have an excellent staff. And Ms. Peshka, congratulations on Ventura County Leadership Academy. And finally, we don't have Commissioner White with us today, but Ms. Fagan, I wonder if we have sort of a bronze-edged map for Commissioner White. Can we make sure that we get one to him, because he will be particularly interested in having this if he doesn't already have it. So thinking of Jim today, anyway, this looks really great. I'm looking forward to pulling mine out and looking at it more. All right, anything else under this item? Hearing none, let's go to item 7. Are there any additions or revisions to the agenda? Hearing none, we're going to go to consent. I understand we're going to pull, Commissioner Chavez, we're going to pull item 8E for further discussion. Are there any other items which commissioners would like to pull? If not, could I hear a motion as to the balance of the consent calendar?
Chavez will move.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Chavez, a second by Commissioner Bill de la Peña. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bill de la Peña? Yes. Commissioner Chavez?
Aye.
Commissioner Edmonds?
Yes.
Commissioner Enegren?
Yes.
Commissioner Huber?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Judge?
Yes.
Commissioner Levere?
Yes.
Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Rollins?
Yes.
Commissioner Sobel?
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick?
Yes.
Vice Chair McDonald?
Yes.
Chair Tremblay?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the record reflects that that item passed unanimously. Let's move then to item 8E. I don't know that we need a presentation for it. I think perhaps what would be appropriate is Commissioner Chavez, could you ask whatever questions you have relative to that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and thank you. It's just for clarification. I understand in the agreement it shows what the responsibilities for each partners in this agreement, VCTC, Caltrans, as well as CHP. Unfortunately, I did not see anything indicating dollar amounts. So I'm curious in regards, I understand Caltrans is sending funding through us for the VSP, and that we end up sending funding to CHP. Did I misread that under VCTC's responsibilities?
The state of California separately funds the California Highway Patrol in the program. So there's actually no funding that transfers between VCTC and CHP directly. It's our funding through the Service Authority for Freeway Emergencies and the revenues that we collect through that entity are used to pay our vendor and other costs for providing the service. But CHP, as part of their normal budgeting process, receives funding to be a part of this program. So the funding is coming from different sources for our services, primarily through the SAFE, and then also through SB1 and the state highway account. So it's a combination of those three funding sources for the FSP service that we provide and pay for the vendor and other services. And then separate from that, the state funds Caltrans and CHP participation in the program.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I was confused about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly. Any other questions on item 8E? If not, Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval.
All right, we have a motion and a second on item 8E. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bill de la Peña? Yes. Commissioner Chavez?
Aye.
Commissioner Edmonds? Yes. Commissioner Enegren?
Yes.
Commissioner Huber?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Judge?
Yes.
Commissioner Levere?
Yes.
Commissioner Long? Yes. Commissioner Rollins?
Yes.
Commissioner Sobel?
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick?
Yes.
Vice Chair McDonald?
Yes.
Chair Tremblay.
Yes. So the record will reflect that was adopted on a unanimous vote. We'll move to item number 9, which is the legislative update. It's a receive and file item. Ms. Peshka.
Thank you, Chair Tremblay. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Darren Peshka. I'm Program Manager of Government and Community Relations here at VCTC. And this morning I have a brief update for you on some recent legislative action in Sacramento and the progress of the state budget and some bills that VCTC has been tracking. The staff report in the agenda packet provides some details of the May revise of Governor Newsom's budget proposal. And it mentions that the state legislature has until June 15th to send a budget to the governor. On Wednesday evening of this week, leaders of the Assembly and the Senate announced that they had reached an agreement on a $300 billion budget package. The legislature's budget is considered a placeholder for now because they are still negotiating with the governor, and those talks are still ongoing. By law, California must have a signed budget in place by July 1st. The legislature is proposing a $10.9 billion transportation package over 4 years. It includes funding for transit, freight, active transportation, and climate adaptation, among other things. One area where the governor and the legislature still disagree is how to provide relief for Californians who are struggling with inflation and higher gas prices. The governor has proposed sending rebates to owners of registered vehicles in the state, providing grants for transit and rail agencies to provide 3 months of free public transit, and suspending a portion of the sales tax on diesel fuel. The legislature proposes sending rebates to all taxpayers and to dependents. The rebates would be limited to households with a joint income of $250,000 or less, and to single filers with an income of $125,000 or less. The finalization of the state budget is likely to be the focus of discussions in Sacramento for the next few weeks, and VCTC will continue to follow these developments and share relevant information with the Commission as it becomes available. And then just a quick update on the bills that we're tracking. Since the beginning of the legislative session, we've been tracking a number of bills which can be found in the bill matrix within your agenda packet. The status of those bills has changed since the agenda was prepared. May 27th, which was last Friday, was the House of Origin deadline, meaning that bills had to be passed out of the House in which they were introduced in order to be considered throughout the rest of the session. All of the bills that VCTC has been tracking, which are on the matrix, passed out of their original houses. So the bills that originated in the Assembly now go to the Senate, and the bills that were originated in the Senate now go to the Assembly. Again, VCTC will continue to monitor the progress of these bills and keep the Commission updated. That concludes my update for this morning, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Peshka. Anybody have questions? Are there any public comments with respect to this item? Okay, well, hearing none, thank you very much for your report. Appreciate it. That item will be deemed received and filed unless there is any objection. Hearing none, received and filed. All right, we're now going to go to item 10, which is our fiscal year 2022-2023 proposed budget. Just, Mr. Mattis, quick question. Would you prefer I open the public hearing now or only at time of public comment?
Sorry. The commission can open the public hearing now, actually.
All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing on this item, under item number 10, and I believe, Ms. DeGeorge, we're ready to go. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Before you is item 10, the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. The budget was reviewed by the Finance Committee on May 25th. After discussion and review, the Finance Committee recommended forwarding the budget as is for the full Commission review. As you can see, this year's budget cover is recognizing our VCTC intercity service. But before we get into the meat of the budget with the numbers, Martin is going to go over the state of transportation funding for you.
Thank you, Sally. Following up from our April budget discussion, as you all know, thankfully, the federal government passed a significant infrastructure bill. We are still continuing to work through the details of this 5-year opportunity for the whole country and Ventura County in particular. As Director Tavares noted, some of the new funding, some of the notice of funding availability is just starting to come about for some of the new programs like Reconnecting Communities and others. So we'll continue to follow this closely and where possible, allocate VCTC's resources as strategically as possible. Without reiterating too much, we continue to be at a competitive disadvantage not having the match money that our neighboring counties have without a local sales tax. But that being said, fortunately, some of the new funding opportunities do not require the same match levels as they previously did, which gives us a slight opening. I used to say in football, you know, you get 7 yards of daylight, you take it, but you still got to move fast. Again, the COVID emergency legislation funding continues to weigh large in all transit operators' budgets. Thankfully, that funding materialized during the most challenging parts of COVID, but it will have a finite lifetime as it's spent down. And once that's gone, that will create some new challenges, particularly if transit ridership has not come back to something close to the pre-COVID levels. And we continue to monitor that very closely. That's part of the TIES study. I think part of the discussion we're having with all the transit operators is how do we most effectively use the transit dollars we have in the county and are going. There is some new funding coming in, which is good on the formula side, but we need to be very mindful and strategic in how we move forward.
Okay. The fiscal year 22-23 budget is a balanced budget at $103.7 million. It is $16.6 million higher than 21-22 and $4.8 million higher than the draft budget, which is largely due to an increase in pass-through funding through the FTA funds to local agencies, as well as an increase to the Metrolink budget for the SCORE project. But I'll go into more detail as we get to the individual programs. First, as we discuss the VCTC budget, it's important to understand where the VCTC revenues come from and how the use of these revenues differ from the city and the county. All revenues from VCTC operations, projects, and programs come from one of three sources: the federal and state grants or local fees. VCTC revenues are restricted use funds, meaning they can't be easily, if at all, transferred between uses and are often very project specific. Unlike the cities, VCTC has no general fund revenue stream that could be used to backfill shortfalls across its various activities. This year, the budget of our federal funds is 26%. This is an increase of $2.5 million of FTA federal funds to local agencies from the draft. Within our state funding, it is now 70% of our budget and increased about $327,000 for a sustainability grant, and the local funding remains the same at 4%. VCTC employs a small but very capable staff that provides support to the region. The final personnel costs are very similar to the draft estimates, and the final costs are actually $14,000 less than the draft budget at just under $3.9 million. As a recap, personnel costs are $3,899,100 for salaries and benefits, or 3.8% of the budget. This includes 23 full-time positions. The decrease of $128,000, or 3.2% from fiscal year 21-22, consists of several factors. We've had some changes in staffing, including internal promotions and a new executive director. We currently have 4 vacant positions that are fully burdened. We expect those to come in lower, but must budget them at a fully burdened until they're staffed. In this year's budget, we have approximately $66,000 for a merit pool for those staff members that are not at the top of their range, and $72,000 proposed 3% COLA for all employees. The budget is about $30,000 less for taxes and pensions due to salary adjustments, and about $28,000 less for insurances, where we're receiving a one-time holiday from insurance agencies. And it's $44,000 less for OPEB contributions this year, as the OPEB trust that the Commission wisely set up back in 2009 has had excellent returns, and so therefore it lowers our ongoing costs. The pension funding level from the last valuation is at 86%, and our OPEB funding level is at 95% based on information from CalPERS. I do want to point out that later in the budget, VCTC has a $1 million payment to CalPERS to continue to lower our pension costs and save interest, and I'll discuss that later. So the comprehensive budget is divided into 6 programs. The expenditures for the upcoming fiscal year, as stated earlier, is $103.7 million, $16.6 million higher than last year and $4.8 higher than the budget. Many of the year-over-year changes were discussed with the draft budget presentation, are also captured in the agenda items, so I will not discuss them unless you have specific questions. But I do want to discuss the changes from the draft to the final, which I will do in the next several slides. Our transit and transportation program at $25.2 million, or 24% of our budget, contains 5 budget tasks that help the Commission to prioritize transportation projects, transit technology, and state and federal funding to better serve our community. There's only one significant change from the draft budget, and that, again, is within the Transit Grant Administration budget. It's an increase of $2.5 million in new FTA pass-through that is going to local agencies. Within our highway program, there were no significant changes from the draft budget. And this program, at $6.9 million, or 7% of the budget, contains 2 budget tasks that are for capital and planning projects that VCTC implements, co-partners, and or oversees on the county's behalf. The rail program at $21.3 million is 21% of the budget and contains 3 tasks which encompass the rail programs within our county. The rail program provides safe and reliable transit alternatives for services going beyond the areas served by our buses. It also provides active transportation opportunities through a recreational multi-use path as part of the Santa Paula branch line. Within this program, there is one significant change, which is found within the Metrolink budget, an increase of $2 million of STA funding for capital improvements associated with the SCORE project. I will note, though it was discussed with the draft budget, that the Metrolink budget does contain about $8.5 million of prior approved funding for capital projects that Metrolink has not yet finished. So that is the reason that the budget is at $20 million, but it is prior money, not new money. The Commuter Assistant Program at $651,000, or 1% of the budget, contains 2 budget tasks that encourage residents to use alternative modes of transportation, and there were no significant changes from the draft budget. Our Planning and Programming Program at $47.1 million, or 45% of the budget, is our largest program. It contains 5 budget tasks that focus on our comprehensive countywide transportation planning and oversight to improve transit and transportation needs within our county. There were a couple of significant changes in this program. The first being the regional transit planning budget increased about $143,000 with the addition of the TDA triennial performance audit that's required every 3 years. We have our regional transportation planning budget that increased about $327,000 with the sustainable grant funding we received to do the 101 Conejo Pass wildlife tracking study in partnership with the Parks Service. And then finally, the TDA administration budget went down about $143,000 of local pass-through as we adjusted the VCTC final budget. Again, to note, with the TDA funding, it is approximately $12.5 million higher. I do want to point out that that is one-time funding to the Commission from prior year revenues, and that money is flowing through to our local agencies, and we are encouraging our local agencies to use those on one-time and capital projects, not for ongoing operations, since it is one-time funding. Within our general government program, there were no significant changes from the draft budget. However, this is where I do want to note that under the management and administrative budget, we have $1 million in this year's budget that, again, we will use to pay for our pension liability to bring that down, as well as save approximately $700,000 in interest over time. At the end of fiscal year 22-23, the $103.7 million balanced budget leaves VCTC with an estimated $20 million fund balance after reserve adjustments. Available for general use funds can only be found within the general fund. That was about $60,000 with a reserve of $50,000. Within our restricted fund balances, the local transportation fund is estimated to have a fund balance of approximately $50,000 with a reserve of $4 million. That reserve of $4 million is set aside so that if the economy should shift in a negative way, we hopefully have enough funds that none of the local agencies will have to revise their budget for LTF funding. And it will provide us a cushion to pay out, to continue to pay out to the local agencies and adjust with the following year. Within the state transit assistant budget, it's estimated that the fund balance will be $17.3 million with no reserve. However, we do use those funds for cash flow issues when we have delayed grants or capital purchases. We have used the STA funding for Metrolink capital purchases, VCTC intercity bus purchases, and potentially for implementation of recommendations that will come out of the TIE study later on this year. Our Service Authority for Freeway Emergencies has an estimated $2.3 million fund balance with a reserve of $1.5 million. That reserve is set aside for the call boxes. And anticipated uses of the safe balance will be additional freeway service patrol routes as justified and needed, and additional incident responder grants in a future year. Finally, our state of good repair balance is estimated to be about $263,000, and the Santa Paula branch line is estimated to be about $25,000. So with that, again, I want to point out that our Finance Committee did meet on May 25th. They reviewed and discussed the proposed budget and recommended forwarding this budget as is to the full commission for review and approval. All of staff is here to answer your questions, our program managers and directors, if you have questions about specific budgets. And as a reminder, staff's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing, which we have already opened, to receive testimony on fiscal year 22-23 budget, to adopt the fiscal year 22-23 salary schedule, which is attachment 1 to the agenda item and attachment C to the budget, effective July 1st, 2022, and adopt by resolution the budget, resolution number 2022-07, as proposed. Again, we are here to answer your questions, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. George. Before I go to open the public hearing, well, we have the public hearing open, but before I get comments from the public, do we have any questions for Mr. George? Commissioner Long.
I just wanted to say thank you for answering all the questions I had at our pre-meeting for the Finance Committee, and just thank you for the deep dive into our programs and to make sure we're doing the best we can for our transit systems. I just really applaud you and for your leadership on that, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Wyrick.
Could you translate the interest savings from the advanced pension payments into an approximate rate of return, order of magnitude you're realizing from that?
Off the top of my head, no. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
However, $700,000 is a significant interest. I will roughly say, because CalPERS requires a 7% return, I'll say roughly that the return on investment would be 7%. But
Still very attractive in today's environment.
it is. It saves long-term costs as well as current costs. So that's more money going to the local agencies and our projects within our county.
I'm a real advocate for all of us, all of our agencies doing that as much as possible.
I am too. I will add on that a note that Commissioner Long asked me about during the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee does take a much deeper dive and asks a lot of questions, and I never know what they're going to ask. But Commissioner Long did ask me another question about the pension, and I will add this to the full commission for your information. CalPERS has an option that we can pay our liability for the year up front, and if so, we have a cost savings by doing that. So I explained to Commissioner Long when she asked that VCTC does that, and we have done it for for several years. Then what I do, because the money is budgeted, at the end of the fiscal year, I make an additional payment. Even if it's only $10,000, $20,000, I take that and I apply it to, we'll call it the principal of our unfunded liability, so that we continue to save even more funding. It is budgeted money, so it's the part of the adopted budget by the commission, but I feel that every dollar that we can pay now is money that we save in the future.
Thank you very much for doing that, and thank you for.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Any other questions from commissioners before I ask for public comment? Just a quick question, Mr. George, and that is, we actually have two kind of amendments to what you saw in the original agenda packet.
Yeah, so
Could you
at
just
the advice
touch on
of
that?
legal counsel, we adjusted 2 pages of the agenda in the packet. The first one was the resolution that you will be adopting. It was a minor adjustment under Section 1, into the paragraph. It simply added, in specific to the salary schedule, I believe it says heretofore in Schedule 1. So it makes it very, very clear that the salary schedule is Schedule 1 of the agenda item. We don't want to have any problems with CalPERS. And then on the salary schedule itself, the commission had never formally adopted a range for the executive director. And again, with legal counsel, due to some recent issues with CalPERS, he felt that it would be good to actually have a range instead of 0 as the bottom end to the current salary, or sorry, not the current salary, but the last range that the commission approved. And so what we did is, under legal advice, we put in what the executive director's salary will be with the COLA as the bottom end of the range for next year, so that there will be a defined range instead of 0 to the high amount. So those were the only 2 changes. They were very minor. It did not change the structure of the budget or any of the funding in the budget.
Thanks, Mr. George. And when we ultimately go to make a motion, hopefully we'll understand that those 2 revisions are in place. All right. Hearing no other commissioner questions at this time, let me open it up to the public. Are there any public comments on this item?
There are no public comments that we've received at this point.
All right, and then let me ask, are there anybody in the audience who wishes to comment on this item? All right, hearing none, we're going to close the public hearing. Before I ask for a motion, I just wanted to compliment you, Mr. George, and compliment staff on a superlative job. You know, going through this amount of budget material in such a short time and having a few questions, because I know that my commissioners, they read these things, and so this is, first of all, it's a Herculean effort to put this together, and secondly, to present it in such a comprehensive and clearly understood way is really helpful, and I want to thank you. And I want to thank Vice Chair McDonald and Commissioner Long, because they asked the really tough questions. And we met twice as an Administration Finance Committee, so you probably felt like you had gone through the gauntlet each time. Well, in a nice way. We asked a lot of questions. Okay. Any other questions from commissioners? May I hear a motion? Oh, and by the way, Mr. Mattis, can we take both of these items together, or do you want us to take both with respect to the resolution?
They can be considered together.
Okay, so we'll do a motion in toto on both items.
So I'll motion to approve staff recommendation as amended. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bill de la Peña? Yes. Commissioner Chavez?
Aye.
Commissioner Edmonds?
Yes.
Commissioner Enegren?
Aye.
Commissioner Huber?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson? Yes. Commissioner Judge?
Yes.
Commissioner Levere?
Yes.
Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Rollins?
Yes.
Commissioner Sobel?
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick?
Yes.
Vice Chair McDonald?
Yes.
Chair Tremblay?
Yes. And the record will reflect that item has been approved unanimously. Again, thanks, Mr. George, for a great job. All right. With that, we're going to move on to item 11, the VMT Adaptive Mitigation Program. And we will be hearing from Ms. Fagan.
Good morning, Commissioner Tremblay and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Amanda Fagan, and I serve as the Director of Planning and Sustainability here at VCTC. With funding from the Southern California Association of Governments, through the Regional Early Action Planning, or REAP program, the Ventura Council of Governments and VCTC partnered to develop a Vehicle Miles Traveled, or VMT, adaptive mitigation program. The program is intended to streamline CEQA processes for housing development that is not otherwise exempt from CEQA review, and is part of a suite of VCOG programs to assist cities and the county in developing housing to meet regional housing needs allocation targets and other housing goals. The staff report and previous briefings to the Commission have provided background on Senate Bill 743 and the transition from vehicle congestion to vehicle distance traveled as a measure of significance under CEQA. So I will spare you the detailed background description here this morning. I will instead turn the floor over to Sean Daly, a senior transportation planner with Iteris, who will share a presentation on the draft VMT Adaptive Mitigation and Management Program Framework. We will then ask for your Commission's feedback on the draft program framework and VCTC's role within that framework. So, Sean, thank you.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Oh, it's right here. Oh, there we go. Well, thank you, Commissioners, for having me. We're really at a midpoint of the project. The first part of it was to develop a draft program framework. So we worked with the staff, VCOG, VCTC, in each of the cities in the county to develop this draft framework. And in the second phase, we're really putting the details together for that. So that's what we're presenting as the framework. As you know, VCOG and VCTC are really regional coordinating agencies, and the actual users of this program would be the CEQA lead agencies for housing development, which would be the cities and the county. So we've really worked hard with the public works, the planning and community development staff of each of the cities to put this together. So a quick background on the program setup, which I think sort of frames the whole thing. Of course, as Amanda was talking about, SB 743, changing the metric to vehicles miles traveled, really altered how transportation was assessed in an environmental sense. And so that filters down as you move away from congestion measures to essentially greenhouse gas emissions and focusing on a mix of land uses and multimodal transportation networks. It really alters a lot of aspects of what's analyzed. I have a little table here sort of comparing all the different aspects that have changed. And, you know, ultimately, I think one of the more important things is you're getting away from really analyzing roadways and how roadway operations work and get towards really how land use and transportation interact. And so, you know, that's really, really the focus. So how do you reduce vehicle miles traveled? Really, it's about shortening trips by building things closer together, or it's by making trips without an automobile. And as you get towards CEQA mitigation for this, the highest level of mitigation is to, of course, just avoid the problem altogether. And so as this is a streamlining program, we're really focused on helping applicants and CEQA lead agencies avoid impacts in the first place. And then the next stage down would be to minimize or rectify, and that's really mitigating that through either you know, on-site mitigation, or going outside beyond the site and working on off-site, really partially funding multimodal transportation projects is really what that's about. So there's a broad concern in this shift to VMT for a number of reasons. Really, it's a new type of analysis. It's a little harder to understand what is good VMT and bad VMT for a lot of people because it's new. There's really different types of development projects that have impacts. It used to be if you built sort of far away and uncongested areas, you would have fewer impacts on the operations of roadways, which was how it was measured. And now those are going to have the highest impact, and the lowest impacts are actually going to be in the more congested areas. And the biggest concern that this project's trying to address, or this program's trying to address, is slowing or adding cost to housing development. So the streamlining is we do not want this to get in the way of housing development, especially affordable housing development. Part of how we're addressing this and the concern we're addressing through that is the idea of a lack of effective or feasible mitigations. Sometimes you have projects that really can't mitigate fully their impacts on site or avoid them, and they have to go beyond their site. They may have to participate in funding something that their agency doesn't control, so the mechanisms really are not quite there currently. I mean, they would be really sort of one-off ideas of mitigation that are not really programmatic or consistent across agencies. And the last concern is really you're talking about different types of mitigation than were done before. So in steps, the REAP program, which was great, it provided funding on a number of levels for VCOG to do programs, and then this one specifically is focused on transportation mitigation for housing development. And of course, streamline is probably, I'll probably reiterate that several times, streamline is really the key word as we develop the program framework. So the intent was not to create some new complex process or barriers. It's really to work within current systems and build capacity and clarity. So what does this program address? So it's really about building a multifaceted program where there are a lot of options provided both to the development community, the project applicants, and the CEQA lead agencies about areas of development which already have low VMT, which are not likely to have impacts, and that's part of the avoidance. Project elements that can lower VMT, they'll just be integrated as part of the project. That's another avoidance. Standards to estimate VMT, as well as sort of standard mitigation options and measures of effectiveness for those. And then I think probably the most important part is really mechanisms for fair share mitigation. So partial payment, that would either be a lead agency saying, we have this one project, you can pay a fee into, or a partial mitigation participation into that project, or you could pay into conceivably a regional project, although that's probably the least likely of them. If you think of a development and you're a developer and you're investing, you're wanting to mitigate as close as possible, and I think the cities do as well. So I think we want to have the mechanism for regional participation, but the idea is that it's probably not a lot of projects are going to have to get to that level. And then the last aspect is standards for mitigation monitoring. So in the development of the program, we really, as I said, this part one was about developing the program parameters, and as we get into part two, it's really about the functional parts and making sure that that's going to work within how the cities operate and all the agencies involved. And then we have a phase of sort of training and implementation. I'd probably add in there sort of adjustment even as we run to issues as the program is underway. So in part one, we started off really with a lot of technical analysis. We actually started off looking at a uniform mitigation fee that would be like one county-wide fee on a bank of projects. Pretty quickly, we sort of got away from that for a number of reasons. It really isn't as flexible, and it requires a lot of administration and management to have a program like that. But we did calculate a dollar per daily VMT reduced. That number is probably a bit lower. We're still working on that calculation, but we took the projects and all the CIPs and transit operations and other potential eligible mitigation funds and wrapped them up into an estimate of a per daily VMT reduced. And so that was a component of it. Really, would the program be limited to housing projects? Pretty quickly, the lead agency said, that's great, but we want to have mitigations for any type of project. So we built that in. And then, like I said, build on current structures or a standalone program. I think everyone was sort of leaning on really supporting the current structures and not creating a whole new administrative item like a mitigation bank. So we're still working on this, but we really are leaning towards a mechanism for funding projects rather than a bank of projects that get funded where someone would just pay a flat fee. And then the last thing were, what are the tools needed by agencies? Part of the way through, there's questions about, well, we have these new VMT studies coming in. We don't know how really to assess them. And so we've sort of added on a component of building capacity and standards of VMT assessment. So one of the activities we did was to look at the housing allocation to sort of scope out what is the scale of this program, what could it be. That really helped inform things. This is mapped where the RHNA allocation of housing is in the last housing elements, all of the housing elements. So there's three criteria that more or less allow you to avoid CEQA transportation impacts. One would be affordable housing. The other would be building in high-quality transit areas. And the other would be generally in areas of low VMT. So we analyzed that, and actually 75% of the RHNA allocation meets one of those criteria. So that really means that that universe of RHNA housing, really only 25% would be likely subject to mitigation. So that's just solid land use planning leading to good transportation. So the next aspect that I mentioned was to sort of calculate a cost per VMT, daily VMT, singular, reduced. And we did so and got to about a $2,000 range. It varies slightly depending on the type of project you're looking at. And this got us to, multiply by those housing units and the amount of VMT they were producing, about $50–60 million total for that whole RHNA cycle. If you divide that by the 8 years, you're looking at, $7–8 million a year potentially. That's the super high end of cost borne to mitigate these projects because, of course, they could do on-site mitigations and other things. So that really wasn't enough money, and it's not a stable funding source to say, oh, we could have a full fee program that could fund a real set of specific projects. So that's how we sort of landed on, well, it's better to use these as mechanisms to fund projects from the lead agencies, and then the option to join a multi-jurisdictional project, a larger project as needed. So as far as the program framework, first and foremost, we're looking at avoidance. So that's reduction strategies for applicants before they even submit, so they can integrate those as project elements. On-site improvements and off-site improvements. Identification of low VMT areas that makes it very clear ahead of time for the development community to understand where those are. And then resources to point them towards affordable housing development options. And then in our mitigation part, which is the minimizing and reducing impacts, are sort of the mechanisms of this program, the standards for mitigation effectiveness and the fair share contribution, which a lead agency could use to fund a specific project, a program of projects, or to contribute to a multi-jurisdictional or regional project. And then the last one are really those CEQA substantial evidence items, which are requirements of CEQA mitigation of nexus additionality and monitoring, which are fairly technical, and this program is taking on so that lead agencies can point to this as sort of their CEQA backup through the program. And none of this is really changing the CEQA lead agency responsibilities. Really, all the statutory responsibilities with the cities and the county in this case. It's really about providing support. And then next steps is really developing that functional program that will be brought back to the commission for approval. One of the biggest reasons I think we're relying a lot on VCTC staff and the website as a centralized county resource location for these items, and really the continuing efforts to support each of the CEQA lead agencies. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daly. Before I ask for public comments, are there any questions from commissioners for Mr. Daly in his presentation? Commissioner LeVere.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you explain a little more about how this program potentially adds costs or slows housing development?
We're trying not to slow housing development at all. And it's really not about adding costs. So this is mitigation that those applicants would have to do anyway. What we're trying to streamline and bridge is provide it so that there's not barriers to them doing mitigation. So a lot of concern is around major developments that basically have exhausted all of their local mitigation, and to pay down their mitigation, they'd have to do some kind of new form of agreement. This would provide a mechanism, hopefully, where they could easily funding participation in like a bike lane project. So I guess the idea is an individual development likely wouldn't, need enough mitigation or have the resources to pay for a full transportation project, but they could have a fair share cost. So this is providing that ability for them.
It seems like there'd be ways we could actually incentivize housing that reduces VMTs and makes it actually easier.
Absolutely. I think part of it is the transparency, because I'm fairly sure no one quite knows when they get involved with these developments, well, how much is this mitigation ultimately going to cost? And so this should provide a lot more transparency to developers.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Sabel.
Thank you, Chair. I think maybe a similar question. So yeah, there's how VCTC would monitor fee option mitigations rather than the CEQA lead agency. So I think it's a similar question. I'm not sure how that relationship works. And
yeah, that's one of the things we're going to work through. I think probably through this program it's going to be standards of mitigation monitoring for VMT, which is still statewide, something that's being worked out. Ultimately, it is on the CEQA lead agency to do that. They're the ones requiring the mitigation. But to essentially lighten their load, this program would provide those standards so that they would have a pretty set program for monitoring. I mean, usually in the past, if the mitigation was like a roadway improvement, it was fairly easy. When that was constructed, we've monitored it, you've constructed it, you've been mitigated. And so a lot of the discussion that's been going on is the types of mitigations that are heavily favored are ones that are very clear in when they're implemented so that they're easier to track because they're open and operating. The harder ones are the more programmatic ones where you'd have to sort of track their implementation over time. So we'll certainly discuss that, but usually CEQA lead agencies don't like doing those for transportation. I think it's like wetlands or fish and wildlife have a lot more ongoing mitigation than transportation traditionally. Transportation is usually you build this thing, you're mitigated, and we're good to go. So we're going to explore that and provide mitigation monitoring options for different types.
cool, thanks. Second question. I hadn't thought about this before, but I've been hearing a lot about different cities and stuff doing curb policies because of the increase of delivery and ride share. So is that part of VMT? So if you're in a community where they're going to have a higher percentage of Amazon trucks driving in, because it should count.
It's a good question. Yeah. And it's a question of whether, are they delivering something that you otherwise would have driven to go by? And correct. So, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the curb management has a lot to do with avoiding safety and congestion issues from double parking and those types of things. I think we're trying to have as much leeway in this program. We're going to have some standard measures of effectiveness for VMT, but certainly we don't want to prevent an applicant or a lead agency for coming up with, if they've measured a program and it's very agnostic to the type of analysis. So if you're saying you're reducing it by 20 VMT and you've got a study for it, I mean, that should be fine. Each of the cities also have their own thresholds of VMT, so our sort of dollar per VMT reduced, it just is sort of agnostic to how each lead agency is setting up their regimen. So it could also be agnostic to the type of improvement as well. So yeah, we definitely don't want to cut off innovative and really effective, potentially very effective measures at all.
Thank you. Commissioner Wyrick.
I love the word imaginative. And in that spirit, and I love the idea that we're not talking about just housing projects too, because especially the importance of adjacency.
Mm-hmm.
And so does this framework open up an imaginative approach where mitigation could even include subsidizing development of adjacency to support services for housing developments to reduce EMT? In other words, food supply, food retailers, that would allow people to get their services without traveling. Would that even open up the possibility for that kind of mitigation?
I think as long as they define it as reducing vehicle miles traveled, yes. I mean, I don't think we would want to even constrain just to, traditional transportation infrastructure mitigations, because there's only so far that gets you, right? If everyone's still spread out, that's still an issue.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're looking into broadband, some other aspects of it. It gets a little hard under CEQA. I mean, it really needs to be tracked in a very sort of quantified manner, and so certainly. We can look at land use options and mechanisms. I think where we were dipping into that a little bit was potentially with affordable housing,
right,
and potentially using some funding for that. So I think there is definite possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Before we let's do this. Thank you, Mr. Daly.
Yeah,
Let
sure.
me ask at this point if there are any public comments with respect to this item.
There are none, Mr. Chair.
All right, and anyone in the audience who wishes to offer a public comment on this item? All right, hearing none, let's pull it back to the commission. Do we have any, before you go, Mr. Daly, before we let you go, does anyone have any additional thoughts? Any commissioners have additional thoughts for Mr. Daly and Ms. Fagan in their development of this program? All right, hearing none, thank you very much for your work. Thanks for your presentation, and we appreciate it very much. All right, we're going to go on to item 12, and I understand we have a guest today. I've heard his name. I think he's known to only a very few of us, but we're looking forward to getting acquainted with him. But I think, Ms. Grasty, you're going to start this item.
I don't actually have much to say other than what you did. I just want to thank Darren for coming and giving us a Metrolink update. I know he had a far commute, so we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, commissioners. Again, Darren Kettle, Chief Executive Officer at Metrolink. It sounds weird to say that in these chambers after 14 years of sitting in a different chair. I can share with you that I had the privilege of serving this commission for nearly 14 years, and I don't ever recall being anxious or nervous coming before this body. And strangely, today, there's some butterflies. So it is good to see a lot of friendly and familiar faces. It's been since March of 2020 that we've been in this chamber from my perspective, so it's been a long time that I've had a chance. And many of you joined this commission in the virtual world when we were doing all those meetings virtually, so it's very nice to be back in person. We at Metrolink are not there yet. We are looking at going back in person in September. But again, it's a pleasure to see all of you. And I will go through a presentation and talk a lot about Metrolink. I'll talk a little bit about our budget, and then I'll be prepared to take any questions you might have. So we're very familiar in Ventura County with the Ventura County line. I'm a regular rider, still live here in Ventura County. Today had the shortest commute I have had in nearly 9 months when I changed jobs, other than working from home because it was only 6 minutes from my home here in Camarillo. But this is the nature of our system, 538 miles. We're the third largest passenger railroad, regional passenger railroad in the country. A lot of people don't realize just how large we are and the population we serve. With 6 counties, 7 route lines that serve those 6 counties, and 63 stations. It's a very, very large network. It's complex. We work with freight railroads, both Burlington Northern Santa Fe and Union Pacific. We share on the Ventura County line the service with Union Pacific. And then, obviously, Amtrak Pacific Surfliner that Commissioner McDonald participates on behalf of this commission. One of the really cool things that we get to be a part of as we look forward is that the Metrolink system is going to be the backbone for public transportation for the 2028 Olympic Games. For those of you that aren't aware, the LA 28 organizing committee, when they submitted their application to the International Olympic Committee, they promised that the workforce and spectators would all take public transit. So very different from what we experienced in 1984, where you could drive up to a venue. We will not be doing that now. Athletes, media will be able to access the venues, but our own personal vehicles, not so much. Mainly out of safety concerns. It's not because of necessarily transportation and congestion, it's mainly out of safety concerns. But to put that into perspective and the role that public transit will play and the role that Metrolink will play, is we heard a statistic out of LA 28 that said the putting on the Olympic Games is the equivalent of 9 Super Bowls a day for 16 days. That is how massive what is going to be coming to Southern California for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So it's a big job. We have a big network, and we're going to be playing a critical role because we're the one transit system that can get you to every venue, including the venue at Lake Paris out in Moreno Valley, where we have a transit stop at the Paris Valley Station with one transfer by transit. So it is expected that we will be that backbone system for the Olympic Games, which is really something pretty cool to be a part of. But the Olympic Games are only 6 years and 2 months away, and that's right around the corner in transportation speak. Let me talk a little bit about ridership and where we are in the pandemic. This is a part of the conversation that we wish we had better news to share across the region, but we're not the only commuter railroad in the country that is struggling to regain ridership. At the beginning of the pandemic, we lost 90% of our ridership. In mid-March of 2020, when we all went home, 90% of our ridership evaporated. With the 10% that stayed, and then actually as we slightly increased through the pandemic, nearly 75% were essential service workers that were staying on our trains. But we've now had to adjust all of our budgeting and all of our ridership forecasts to what is a very new and challenging normal. The definition of a commuter has fundamentally changed. My own team, we have a hybrid work schedule where they're in the office 3 days a week. Where they used to be in the office 5 days a week, and sold monthly passes, that ridership has completely changed. And those are, fare revenues are our single largest, or had been, our single largest revenue stream. And when I get to the budget, we'll touch on what the ramifications are of the fact that we've lost this ridership. Today, we did, and I'll touch on restoring service. At the same time that we hit the pandemic, we reduced our service by 30% throughout the system. In April of this year, we brought back 2/3 of that service. And the day we did that, we actually saw a ridership recovery of about 20% increase over our prior numbers. So we did bring service back, and riders came back. Since that time, in early April, and here we are at the beginning of June, our numbers have started to flatten back out again. And we're at somewhere around, if we have, on our really good days, we're close to 40% of our pre-pandemic ridership. Really good days are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when people are actually going back to their offices, where a lot of us are still working from home on Mondays and Fridays. So our data shows that. So probably not a huge surprise. But it's also, it varies by line. And the Ventura County line, and you'll recall me sharing this with you when I sat in Martin's chair, that Ventura County line was already struggling with ridership. It has been also one of our slowest to recover. I think it's a byproduct of the nature of the people that ride the Ventura County line. I will say it's the Ventura County line and our Orange County line that have been our slowest to recover. Those are also the lines that, from a demographic perspective, have the greatest chance of people that are professionals that are able, capable of, and effective working from home. Whereas the San Bernardino line and the Antelope Valley line are folks that are generally having to go to different places for work and may not either have the education or other things that would take to go into downtown LA, Burbank, Anaheim, major work centers. So the numbers that we have before you see up here today, we're getting to Q4, we're expecting as much as 44% of our pre-pandemic ridership. We're not going to hit that number. We're going to have to wrestle with some budget deficits internally, and we are working on that now to mitigate any impacts on our 5-member agencies, which is the other major funding source for Metrolink. So here's a little bit more about ridership recovery. Touched on this. What's also interesting is that we have recovered. One of the things we are recognizing we have to do, and I've said this in a lot of different forums, is that we can't be your grandfather's Metrolink. We are having to sort of redefine who we are as an agency. We can't just be about the commuter. We can't just plan on we're taking some suburban person from Camarillo, catching a train at 6:22 in the morning into their offices in LA. And we have to look at our service model very, very differently. And we are starting to do that. We actually started to do that with some of the service we brought back. But the weekend service has actually recovered more quickly. And the reason for that is that we have worked very, very hard on, again, shifting that mindset that it's more than just about the commuter. It's about the leisure trip. It's about travel. It's about a discretionary trip. It's about going into work, taking a trip for another purpose besides that commute. So we continue to push for that, and then again, you can sort of see our best days. The question came up earlier in your commission meeting about how free fares are working, that type of thing. Our high water mark was Earth Day when we provided free fares on that Friday, Earth Day. We did get to 50% of our pre-pandemic ridership that day, a little over 20,000 daily riders that day, and a whole bunch of young families. So this notion about trying to get beyond us being just about the commuter railroad is a way to get there, but it's not going to be a quick solution. So I talked about the April 4th service restoration. What's really, I think we're really pleased and proud of is that, for one, I was pleased as a user of our system that we added one more train in the morning on the Ventura County line, so I don't necessarily have to catch the 6:22 a.m. train out of Camarillo. I can catch the 7:22. So that little extra hour of sleep, which I've still not really taken advantage of yet, but it's something at least I know I can do. But the other cool thing is that we added code-shared trains with the Amtrak Pacific Surfliner. So you can use a Metrolink ticket, and you can ride Amtrak Surfliner, Pacific Surfliner, to allow yourself more options. We all know that the Ventura County line, from a Metrolink perspective, doesn't have as much service as the rest of our system. And Mr. Erickson mentioned that some of the challenges about not having a local transportation sales tax measure. One of them, our other counties, the other 4 counties do, and they fund their Metrolink service with transportation sales tax dollars. So in the case of Ventura County, and it's, again, important to me, we worked very closely with Pacific Surfliner to add these code share trains, so we have more options on the Ventura County line at no cost to either LA County Metro or VCTC, who would normally be funding that service. And the added little perk to this is that we extended that code share to the Ventura downtown station, so that now it doesn't just go to East Ventura, but 7 days a week, you can now use a Metrolink ticket to get to downtown Ventura, which we'd never had before. And what we have tried to do, and I think we'll be working with your team at VCTC, is how do we market that better? People just, people don't get that yet, and we've got to do a better job of explaining how they can take advantage of that. Mainly, from my perspective, the more people we have off the 101 freeway on Saturdays and Sundays coming through Ventura County, the better off we all are. Take the train to Oxnard, take the surfliner to Oxnard, take it to Ventura, come to Camarillo for the outlets. Go to Moore Park, so I don't know, you can go to Anagrin Brewing or something along those lines. So there we go. So a little bit more about the Ventura County line service. I touched on this specific surfliner train, so we now have 4 that serve the downtown station. That again, I think opens up options. We just have to do a better job of being able to explain it. We've got some, in an effort to try to drive ridership and bring ridership back, we've done a number of summer fare promotions. We just launched the $15 summer pass. Anywhere in our system, you can take a train on that same day, no matter where you want to go, for $15. And so that, again, the idea is get on the train, take an adventure. We have the 10-day holiday ticket, $10 holiday ticket, and then a $10 weekend day pass, and on weekends, kids ride free. So those are all of the things we're trying to do to, obviously you didn't, other than one other program that we started, we created a new 10-day flex pass. So this new commuter, this newly defined commuter who doesn't take the train 5 days a week, has the flexibility of buying a passing and using it a couple days a week, and then maybe they don't go into work the next week, but then the following week. So it provides much more flexibility to attract that new commuter. So the summer fare promotions are all about take the adventure, and then we're also, of course, not giving up on the idea of of the new commuter. It's an exciting time. Your budget proceeded today. Mr. Erickson talked about what's going on at the federal and state level as it relates to funding. Obviously, the bipartisan infrastructure package is huge for transportation in this country. I would say that it has never been larger and comparable as to what we are seeing for passenger rail. I think many people are aware of the nickname of our president in the White House, known as Amtrak Joe, because he was a regular commuter on Amtrak. He's a big fan of passenger rail. Passenger rail sees the greatest amount of investment since the formation of Amtrak in the early 70s. Our job now is to try to position ourselves well to access those dollars. And our strategy at Metrolink is to do what we can with the state budget surplus that Ms. Peshka talked a little bit about today in her presentation. And how do we leverage these, what is, at least as of right now, it could be $10 to $15 billion for transportation, a lot of it going to transit, to leverage that to go after federal funds, to build out this network, to buy new rolling stock, to add double track and other new projects to our system. Real quickly, I'm going to talk about SCORE. That was mentioned very briefly earlier today too. SCORE is our Southern California Optimized Rail Expansion Program. It's a $10 billion effort. We've got the first $2.5 billion in the bank, so to speak, actually $2.3 billion in the bank. And so we're proceeding with projects all over Southern California on that. We have one here in Ventura County that Commissioner Judge is going to be very familiar with, being in the city of Simi Valley, where we're doing additional double track at the Simi Valley Station, as well as a new undercrossing at the Simi Valley Station and a new platform. The whole idea about SCORE is to allow for throughout Southern California to have half-hour frequencies during the peak travel time throughout our system. We will have, at the completion of the first $2.5 billion portion of our program that we have generally the money in the bank, we'll have the track capacity to do almost all of that. What we won't have is the rolling stock capacity. So our locomotives and our passenger cars, we won't have the full-size fleet, but we will have the capacity. So that is our next part of the project, for SCORE, is how do we access more dollars for additional equipment. This project, again, has a project cost of about $100 million. There are some other benefits from this project as well, and probably the biggest being is that when the project's complete, with one other at-grade crossing that needs some improvements, the city of Simi Valley will be able to pursue a quiet zone throughout the entire jurisdiction of the city of Simi Valley. So not only do we have benefits for the nature of our passenger service, it's much safer as it relates to all of those crossings having what are called sealed corridor crossings, so that the gates are down to protect both cars and pedestrians. But then the side benefit is it becomes ready for a quiet zone. A little bit about our budget, and I first want to make sure I thank Claire Grasty and Martin Erickson and the transit team here at VCTC. We, as I shared, we get fare revenues, but the bulk of our budget is now coming from our member counties, the 5 member counties. So we've worked over the last 4 months very collaboratively with your staff to develop our budget. My thanks to this board today, because in your budget actions today, you approved the funding for the Metrolink budget for the coming fiscal year, so thank you. I will say, in the case of VCTC, you're still benefiting from the CARES Act funding that came about in 2020. You're the last county in our system that still has CARES money on account at Metrolink. So that is helping to, I'll call it, reduce what may have been some of the larger impacts. Unfortunately, that money doesn't go on forever, so at some point the hens will come home to roost and we'll have other conversations. But for now, we're in a good place. You can see that our operating budget's nearly $300 million, and our total capital budget is just a little over $200 million, with projects that involve rehabilitation, new capital, and we're hoping to purchase some new rolling stock. If you've seen our locomotives, those are Tier 4 locomotives, the nice new shiny ones. We have 40 in our fleet. Ultimately, we need to get to 55. We have received a grant out of the South Coast Air Quality Management District to fund a portion of that purchase for another 10 of those locomotives. Again, Tier 4 cleanest burning locomotives in the country. And we're hoping, we're using that grant to as our match for a federal raise grant to try to get us to the full 10 new locomotives for our system. So that's that last rolling stock question right there. Ventura County's share for that is a relatively small amount of $400,000 to allow us to upgrade our fleet. It would mean we would only have 5 Tier 2 locomotives left in our fleet, so a very, very clean fleet. And we'd have the largest fleet of Tier 4 locomotives in California. One quick side note, as it relates to Tier 4, we made a big announcement a few weeks ago. We're also the first railroad in the world to power our entire fleet, our locomotives, with renewable fuel. So there is no petroleum in our fleet. So it's again, we're pretty proud that we're the first railroad in the world to have our locomotive fleet powered by renewable fuel. Some ongoing budget challenges. I mentioned ridership. We are going to do everything we can to try to rebuild ridership, but it is not going to happen overnight. The fact that we do not have the various COVID relief funding coming about any longer, that's going to be, at some point, that's going to impact all of our member agencies. And again, VCTC is at least in a place for probably another year to take advantage of revenues on account at Metrolink. And the real challenge for us, of course, at Metrolink is at some point, given where we are, there is only going to be so much that we can come to our member agencies for, and we're going to have to look at some real tough questions that my board's going to have to address as it relates to how do we, if we're going to look at a new system in Southern California, how do we look at how we pay for it? So that is something that is, I try to refrain from using the analogy of an oncoming train, or the light at the other tunnel is an oncoming train, but in this case, from a funding perspective, we'll have some real challenges ahead of us, and I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that we do have that. Mr. Chair, thank you. That completes my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kettle. Let's start with questions. I see Commissioner Long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennel. Nice to see you, even if we're on the other side of the dais here. Question for you is the ridership. What is the main reason why they're not using Metrolink? Do we know that? Have we surveyed your riders?
Yes, we have, and actually, we just finished a survey a few weeks ago that hasn't even been presented to our board yet, but since we're all the way up here in Ventura County, and I don't think the LA Times is here to report on it, I can share a little bit of information. The biggest thing is that they've simply not come back to work. We track the LA, particularly the LA professional office market, very closely. And the LA professional office market has actually, it jumped up a little bit back in April and May and has dropped back down to about 40% occupancy, whereas pre-pandemic it was about 98% occupied. So that's a big part of it. We have, and again, it goes back to the demographic. Those that are in industries that can very easily work from home, those numbers have been the ones that have not come back just yet. We are seeing different shifts in this, and I think it's, right now we've been doing these forecasting efforts, and I don't want to call it a fool's errand to try to have to figure this forecast out, but it is a real challenge because there are so many moving parts. Just recently, this morning, quick review of the LA Times, LA mask mandate may come back. If that happens, that changes how I think people manage their offices and what happens there. So it is a real moving target.
Well, the reason why I was asking is just looking in our area, why do people take the train? Many of them, I'm on the airport board authority as well, and it's to get to Burbank Airport and LAX. I'm going to be picking up someone at Metrolink in a minute from LAX, and the difference of an Uber of $100 and something bucks versus $22 is crucial for our community, especially with gas as high price. So just a thought or a suggestion of marketing what the actual cost of a train is. Yeah, it might be 2 hours to get here with the flyway and this, but is that a cost-effective way of getting there? I know some people look at it as, oh, I want a carpool and I want this, but a lot of people are bottom line. They need to know what their cost-effective is. It's easy for me to get in a car and go to Burbank Airport and park. But if I can't afford it as much, or if that means I can use the money in a different way, a lot of our working class might move more to bus systems and Metrolink if they know what the costs are. And for me, it was really like digging in to get how much it actually would cost. And no one's going to take that time.
Right.
So that's just a suggestion from someone who doesn't normally use Metrolink. How do you create those habits is my question on like a sales and marketing hat. So thank you.
Great point. We do have partnerships with Burbank Airport in cross-marketing. Just yesterday, I helped a couple who are on their way to Istanbul put their luggage onto our trains. So full-service CEO here at Metrolink. And they were taking the flyway. So it is something, we have to do a better job of marketing all of these different opportunities, and that's stuff that we're working on already.
Well, and just because if you're saying, there's also the talk about how work is changing. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. So you can't just say, only people that are going to work, that's who we're going to focus on. Life as we know it is changing, and so I would love to know how Metrolink is changing, because it's a huge cost, and it's a huge cost of our budget line also, and we want to invest and be partners with you. So just what apps, all those kind of things. Thank you.
Commissioner Anagern.
Thanks for coming by today, and this is a great report. I got a question for you on the broadening of the service. You mentioned people aren't, commuting to work anymore and trying to work on the weekends to get people out to Santa Barbara and Ventura. Did you ever think about opening that up to evening service and trying to coincide more with sporting events in LA, or just the people that have been working at home all day in their house need to get out and go to dinner and not drive?
Several of the lines, we actually have that in place. So the San Bernardino line is our best example, where we have later evening trains. We don't have that on the Ventura County line. It's one of the things that we want to see, how do we explore doing that. As we're bringing service back, when we brought that 2/3 of the service back in April, we broke up the day. We used to, again, be a very, very heavy morning, very heavy evening with nothing in the middle. As we've brought service back, we're trying to that's exactly what we're trying to do, is provide all-day service versus peak service. It does take time, and those are the things that we're working on. The Ventura County line has its own challenges. The last train out of LA is an Amtrak train at 7:10 p.m. That's not, you might have an early dinner, and that would be about it. So I think those are areas that we want to get to. The real challenge with this, again, is the cost that is associated with it. I've certainly had my eyes opened in my first 9 months at Metrolink at the cost to run a railroad. As you saw, we have a $500 million budget between operations and capital this next cycle, and where if we want to go in that direction, Commissioner Enegren, is then we need support from our member agencies to do that now, or we find other funding streams for operations. We generally do pretty well from a capital perspective. Capital, I don't say we're capital rich, but we're pretty capital healthy. When it comes to operating, that is where we are challenged. Certainly, Chair Tremblay can speak to this, as the chair is also on my board, and we've been having a lot of budget conversations. So we can put more service out there. We have to identify funding for it, and certainly in my first 9 months, I'm finding areas where I think we can find. We operate on long-term contracts. The agency, we have quick backstory. We have about 283 employees at Metrolink. We have close to 1,200 contract employees that are the part of the Metrolink family. So we do a lot by contract. So we've got to look at some of our own contracts to find out maybe where we get some savings there, but we're dealing with long-term contracts that are going to take some time to cycle through. But I think that's what we want to get to that point. I think if you were to have the same conversation with Chair Tremblay, you've heard this, how do we provide more service out there at different times of the day, particularly into those evening hours, and it's going to be a question of resources.
Commissioner Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Kettle, for the presentation and the update from Metrolink. I'm curious if we're tracking the number of Ventura County riders that are utilizing Metrolink on the co-share lines.
We are starting to develop that data since it's only 2 months old. That's really, I'd say, where we've added that service level. So we do have the data. It takes a little bit of time to come in because we have to get the information from LoSAN. So if someone jumps on a Pacific Surfliner train, it takes time to process the rider. We actually pay then to LoSAN for the Surfliner to carry our rider. So we will be tracking it, but the data's still not yet available.
I appreciate that, and hopefully in the future we can, both on Metrolink and on this side, we can be able to see that data for the Ventura County line and any other co-sharing lines that are out there. Just a few comments in regards to what Commissioner Long was saying in regards to riders understanding the differences with the cost savings. It's actually more than just about the cost. It's about frequency of the service. And I believe the double track that's occurring in Simi Valley and in other areas of the Metrolink system will help improve that. It was mentioned that 30-minute headways. As someone younger that used to depend on public transit here in Ventura County, the difference between waiting 40 minutes for a bus or even longer, depending on the ridership, you get longer headway times. It's important to have that flexibility and efficiency. And I think the double track projects, or the SCORE project, is actually going to help with that. And it's going to be a viable option for our region when people start seeing that the frequency. So it's not just the cost, because cost is nice, but at the same time, we need to make sure that it fits into people's daily lives. And I think the SCORE project is going to do that. So thank you for you and your staff for working hard on that. I know it's not a recent thing, it's a long process, and it's still ongoing as we continue to look for the funding to be able to fund all those projects. The last thing I would just say is I appreciate the marketing team at Metrolink for putting out their ads on all of the social media platforms, promoting the different fare structures. I also appreciate the fact that they're incorporating their board of directors so that their board of directors are able to disperse that same information on their social media platforms, which in turn spreads out to more people so that they're aware of it. I didn't get the opportunity at our last meeting to say this, but thank you to you and Neolia Rodriguez, our Chief of Staff over there, for coming and presenting during the Oxnard Leadership Program. A lot of our participants did not know all that information about Metrolink, and a lot of them were already planning on what kind of trips they can take on the weekend with their kids. So those definitely that sparked their attention was that the kids ride free. And I believe it's up to four kids, or 4, 5?
I just know there has to be an accompanying adult. I don't even know if we have a number on that off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, either way.
I don't think we're going to kick any kids off, though, Commissioner Chavez.
I mean, if you want to kick mine off.
At least not for not having a fair. If they're hooligans, maybe we'll kick them off, but no.
No, but I appreciate it because it's a lot of great things, and one of the bigger things for me as someone who's been part of public transit for the past 11 years is the fact that listening to the people is the best advice that anyone can take, and Metrolink definitely has been doing that. So kudos to you and your team for doing that. Thank you for the update. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've got Commissioner Sabel and Commissioner Edmonds on deck. Commissioner Sabel.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. One is, how are your staffing levels adequate, or are you challenged like a lot of other entities?
Metrolink has we had a hiring freeze at the beginning of the pandemic. We're bringing people back. I think, one of the things as a leader of the organization, we've had a lot of movement, both in and out of the organization. So we're making our way through. It's not easy. We've had to deal with a couple different issues as it relates just to retention and those types of questions. But I think as we build the team back up, I think we're going to be okay. We're just at a point where we have a lot of new faces in the organization because we had gone 2 years without hiring professional level staff.
And then a second question, the use of bicycles is skyrocketing, and when I use Metrolink, I go ride and bike, and so I wonder if part of your statistic gathering is involving how many people are riding with bicycles and ways to incentivize that, and maybe add more room for bikes and stuff.
We do. Our data does show who comes in with bikes. Our conductors are asked to make sure that we tally bikes as they come in. During Bike Month, during Bike to Work Week, we offered free rides on our system for anybody that had a bicycle. So those are some of the incentives that we try to put out there. We have not yet found where we've had this. Obviously, our rolling stock, our passenger cars are a finite size, so every space we take to allow for bicycles, we end up losing chairs. Now, right now, not having a lot of seats hasn't been a big problem as ridership's been down, but nonetheless, that's always been the biggest challenge. Is we've not had we just have competition for space and a limited fleet. So we have a few of those factors that we have to work into it, but we recognize and do market. Part of the adventure is a bicycle venture on Metrolink, so we do push that.
Commissioner Evans.
Yes, it's good to see you.
Hi, Lynn.
I'm a novice train rider in the United States, but a very experienced train rider in Europe when we would go visit, and I was always impressed with the rapidity and the scheduling that is so on tune. And I decided to take the leap and get back on the train, and I went up to Cambria from Ventura. And if you're serious about wanting to promote recreational travel, it was a lovely trip, and it was so efficient, and I had people help me on, help me off. It was like when I was in Switzerland. So I was impressed with the change in that customer service pattern. The other thing, though, is I'm sitting there thinking, now which town comes next? And on many of the buses, it'll have the line, so you predict ahead of time when you should be starting to get up. And they do announce it, but it was nice to be able to watch where it is, and that was not on my bus. That wasn't available. And also, if you want to promote travel, you might have a little brochure about the different towns so that people could know where to go and what to do. I know I was impressed with the stations, too. I was surprised how clean they were and how efficient. and how there was information, like in San Luis Obispo, when you get off, right there is a tablet that says, do you want other places to go? This is how to get there. But I know that internet will help that a great deal. But I think promoting those underlying things is exciting, and I was very impressed. So I wanted to thank you and Metrolink.
Well, I'd love to take some of that credit, but a lot of that goes to Surfliner, Low Sand Surfliner, and the communities that are served. Someday, maybe we get north of Ventura with Metrolink, but that's not something that is in our sights at the moment. But I think, to your point, the more we can do, and I'd ask you to follow Metrolink on particularly Instagram or on Twitter. You will see how we are doing just that. I wasn't joking when I mentioned the fact that we talk about you can, on our page, we tell you how to get to Enegrin Brewing in Moore Park. Because we want to encourage people getting to communities, how it can be used for something other than that commute trip. And we have that. We just cut a deal here in Camarillo with the Bella Inn here on Ventura Boulevard. So those are the outlets. So those are the types of things that we're trying to, again, shift that mindset. And in California, we haven't done it. You know, it's just not what we've done for over 50 years, longer than that, 60, 70 years, if ever. And so it's taking time to turn that aircraft, about getting people to think about, oh, I can use the train for that. But it goes back to what Commissioner Chavez said, who's also one of our best influencers in social media because he posts our stuff all the time as one of our alternates at Metrolink, that a lot of it does come back to how frequent our service is, you know, and we have a lot of maturity to do in that regard, and we would love to get to that point. I think my board would love to get to that point, but it does come at an expense that right now our budgets don't support. And someday maybe that changes, and maybe the moments we're in today coming out of the pandemic are that opportunity to start looking at the way we've built Metrolink. We're 30 years old later this year. The way we built Metrolink, that structure was fine for 30 years, but is that what's going to keep us in place both from a governance perspective but from a funding perspective for the next 30 years? That's some of the questions that Chair Tremblay and the rest of my board will be getting a chance to deal with over the course of the next few years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Enegren.
Thank you. So, I never tell if this thing's on or not. Sorry.
Yeah, you're clear.
It's on now.
On the May revise, Governor included the $750 million incentive grants for transit and rail agencies to offer free public transit. Instead of offering free public transit on the rails, why wouldn't we just expand the service with that money? It's like giving someone a free sample of something you can't really use that much.
I certainly wouldn't want to speak for the governor or the California State Transportation Agency, who is the entity that's pitching that notion. We've had some questions about how that $750 million could be used in different ways. We were told in no uncertain terms that this is for free transit in the interest of equity, and that's it. And we kicked around some ideas. Well, again, our service is, is it something where maybe you buy it down a little bit? Going back to some of the flexibility questions that came up that Mr. Erickson mentioned. At least out of the governor's office, and their pitch and their proposal was, you can opt in to the program, but it's going to be free for this purpose. And that's only one party to the budget negotiation. So what might happen out of the Assembly and the Senate that might shift that? Maybe there's some room, but we haven't seen it just yet. So from our perspective, we'll follow the rules of the game, but the rules of the game are yet to be defined, other than by one party, who's only one of really three of the, I'll call it, decision makers in that allocation of funding.
Okay. I feel like it's a missed opportunity. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Kettle? Commissioner Johnston.
Good morning, Mr. Kettle. It's great to see you. I'd like everybody to imagine what it would be like if we came into a meeting and Caltrans, Mr. Tavares came in and said, well, unfortunately, drivership is down, and so we're doing all this marketing and all these promotions to try to get people back in their cars so that we can continue to offer the sort of service we offer throughout Ventura County. Imagine if, drivership was down, so Caltrans had to consider closing freeway exits in Ventura County. The changes in commuting patterns, I think it's important that everybody understand that this could really go both ways when it comes to transit. Will it make sense for people to travel less on Metrolink or travel less by car? And I urge my colleagues on the commission to consider this in terms of what we do locally. We also really need to, at the local level, reconsider parking minimums when we're looking at office use or even residential use. When we see the office professional use being reduced because of the post-COVID work patterns, then suddenly maybe it doesn't make sense for an office building to require one parking spot for every desk. And similarly with residential. And when you consider this too about how it would affect the people in your community, the monthly cost of car ownership plus having a parking space buys somebody a whole lot of transit and rideshare. But so as we look forward to what we can do with Metrolink, Mr. Kettle, what can I do on City Council to really get the word out, especially for what we're doing in Ventura, for what you are doing in Ventura?
This is all about partnerships, and thank you for the support of our system. I think we have great opportunity ahead of us. I think all of our local jurisdictions have or have as part of their operations some sort of tourism boards, those types of things. I think we need to. You started off with, well, if Mr. Tavares were to come in and talk about the fact that we all of a sudden people aren't using our freeways. Well, the auto industry is. They kind of want to make sure that we keep driving our cars, and they have a whole lot larger marketing budget than any of us combined. So the point that you can get to where you're talking about being a partner where your Convention and Visitors Bureau is pumping out the information throughout Southern California that you can pay $10 on a Saturday, you can bring your 3, 4, 10 kids, you can catch a train in Northridge, and you can come to our cool little downtown. Those are the types of things. We can do that, but I think there's opportunity that those types of groups have that can help us magnify the message. And that can be the case throughout all of Ventura County. And I think those are our best opportunities. We'll do our part, but that, I think, is probably the lowest hanging fruit that we can try to capture, given all of our limited resources to talk about it. And just, telling the story, people watch city council meetings. Any time you can pitch these opportunities, I think that's, people are going to hear it.
Thank you. Let's see. I have some comments, but before I go there, let me ask if there are any comments from members of the public. I know this is a receive and file presentation, but are there any public comments? Have we received any public comments by email?
We have not, Mr. Chair.
We have not. Okay. All right. Mr. Kettle, thank you very much. I do have some comments, and if we could go back to the next to last slide, and these are not meant to be pessimistic comments. They are meant to be realistic comments from a fiscal standpoint. What keeps me up at night relative to Metrolink are two things. Only two, actually, but believe it or not.
I wish mine were only 2 right now.
Yeah, well, there are a lot more for you. But principally, being privileged to serve as this body's primary representative on the board, one is on the ridership recovery numbers and where we are currently, and Mr. Kettle has already taken you through that. But the reason, obviously, that they are so significant, other than wanting to have more people get on public transit, and that is that the drop in ridership revenue is significant, and then that needs to be made up from the member agencies. And as Mr. Kettle said earlier, the bulk of Metrolink's budget comes from the 5 member agencies. So we're obviously on the board very concerned on ridership recovery, and a lot of questions come in at every meeting on that and how to improve that. And again, there was a prior slide on this that, I want to go back actually to the
Was it the
challenge. No, to the challenges slide. Just keep the challenges up there. It's at the, sorry,
That
it's
was
at,
towards the end, I believe.
yeah, it's at the very
Right
end.
there.
Yeah, okay. And so that is, that's number one. Number two is on the budget side, both with respect to Metrolink and with respect to this commission. With respect to Metrolink and its budget, Darren mentioned at our last board meeting on May 27 that Metrolink is transmitting its budget to the member agencies. He has told the program chiefs to immediately beginning July 1 prepare for a 10% decrease in expenses. So that is a sobering reminder of where we are because of ridership flattening out after an initial increase. And actually, the operating deficit will be a little higher than what was originally forecasted this year, I think probably in the 6 million range rather than in the 5 million range. And actually, the corollary to that is, Darren mentioned that Metrolink is capital health, I'm going to term this, capital healthy but O&M challenged. And that is a rather unique financial challenge for any entity, but particularly from a budget standpoint, it is, and the ongoing budget challenges, that is unique. Where that translates here, though, for VCTC, our operating percentage has gone up to, if I remember correctly, under Ms. Grasty's good tutelage, upward north somewhere of 7%, or about 2.5% just this year. Now, that's a smaller increase than the other member agencies. Their percentages have gone up somewhere between 11% and 19%. We are currently well-positioned to cover the increases because we have an increase in LTF and we have conservative use of CARES Act monies. So we're well-positioned right now to fund the increases at Metrolink, even if the ridership is slower to recover than what we want. But it's a concern for us because we wouldn't be able to subsidize the entire nut for Metrolink absent the CARE funding. And so I think what may end up happening is we on this commission, we may see a mid-year budget adjustment coming back to us sometime during this 22-23 budget year to pay for increased subsidy if the ridership recovery doesn't go as we expected. So just saying right now, we may end up having to look at this again in the context of our own budget mid-year 22-23. And so all of these items, again, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but just realistically, we need to keep our eye on the ball fiscally. And I want to thank you, Mr. Kettle, because I know you are working, and Metrolink staff is working extremely hard on all of these items and all these good questions that have come forth. With that, any other, and it's nice to have you back, by the way. Albeit for one meeting.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Are there any other comments from commissioners? All right, with that, I'll close this item. Thank you again, Mr. Kettle.
Yeah.
Appreciate it very much. With that, then, that was a receive and file without objection. That will be the order of the commission. We're going on to an action item, item 13, which is the zero-emission bus fleet rollout plan and RFP. And Mr. Bonfilio, I think you're leading us off.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Aaron Bonfilio for VCTC. This item before you is a two-part item. First, to approve an agreement with a consulting firm, Stantec Consulting Services, and then secondly, to authorize the executive director to execute the agreement. As the Commission will recall, in February of this year, an RFP, or request for proposals, was released to solicit proposals from firms to provide VCTC with the zero-emission bus fleet rollout plan. The ZEB, or Zero Emission Bus Rollout Plan, is required by the State of California Air Resources Board through its Innovative Clean Transit rule or set of regulations. The ZEB plan will provide as a guiding document to VCTC its path forward with regard to meeting its requirements to completely transition its fleet to zero-emission vehicles by 2040 or 2040. That said, there was a robust set of proposals that were received, up to 6 proposals. Responsive proposals were received by VCTC on the deadline of March 10th. an evaluation team reviewed those proposals for responsiveness first, and then to address any qualitative or conduct its evaluation. VCTC ranked the proposals. The highest ranked proposer was Stantec Consulting Services. That name may be familiar to some of you who sit on the Gold Coast Board. It is the same firm that is currently and nearly complete with Gold Coast's zero-emission bus rollout plan. As well, Stantec Consulting has recently completed the ZEB rollout plan for Santa Barbara Municipal Transportation District, up north, the Golden Gate Highway Transportation District, and down south with OCTA. VCTC's evaluation identified Stantec as the highest ranked firm from a qualitative standpoint, as well from a price proposal standpoint. They were the second lowest proposal. The lowest ranking, or the lowest cost proposal being a very, I guess, brief proposal, for lack of a better term, had also a very brief timeline. So from a cost standpoint of cost per day over the course of the entire proposal, Stantec was actually the lowest cost proposer. Additionally, the proposals, generally speaking, ran at about 300 days, give or take, and Stantec was similar and found to be competitive in that nature. VCTC's recommendation is to proceed forward with Stantec Consulting, and once, or if that's approved, we'll begin the rollout plan development, which should take approximately 10 months. And our deadline to submit that plan back to the state is June 2023. The consultant could not be here today. However, they did want to thank the commission for their consideration. They had a prior engagement and travel commitments. However, I am available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bonfiglio. Any questions from commissioners for Mr. Bonfiglio? All right. Do we have any members of the public who are in the audience who wish to comment on this item?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
Do we have no written comments on this item? All right.
Mr. Chair, I would move the recommended action.
Travis seconds.
Thank you. I hear a motion and a second on this item. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bill de la Peña. Yes. Commissioner Chavez.
Aye.
Commissioner Edmonds.
Aye.
Commissioner Enegren.
Aye.
Commissioner Huber.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson. Yes. Commissioner Judge. Yes. Commissioner LaVere.
Yes.
Commissioner Rollins.
Yes.
Commissioner Sobel.
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick.
Yes.
Vice Chair McDonald.
Yes.
Chair Tremblay.
Yes. Record will reflect that that item was adopted on a unanimous vote. With that, we'll go to item 14, the VCTC General Counsel's report. Mr. Mattis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nothing to report today, although we do have a brief closed session today.
Right, and we'll come back, we'll circle back to you in just a minute on that one. All right, let's move now to agency reports. First one, Southern California Association of Governments. Commissioner Judge?
Thank you. It's very apropos that we talked about the zero emissions fleet, because that was the big thing. I missed our last meeting, unfortunately, because I was at the SCAG general meeting in Palm Desert, where we had a couple of good breakout sessions. Most of them dealt with, the ones that I went to anyways, was dealing with the zero emission fleet, the buses, the electrified buses, the electrification of our system, other fantasies that we have going on in the state. A lot of the companies that have bought these buses, do we have any in our system, and as far as VCTC or in Gold Coast, is the electric buses yet?
We have electric buses now. We're looking at going to a zero-emission hydrogen fuel cell-based system.
Yeah, that seems to be the way everybody wants to go, because the electric buses that are coming out right now aren't working for a lot of the agencies that have them. So I was amazed by that kind of thing when they put it out there. Little tongue-in-cheek. Other than that, there wasn't too much else going on at the SCAG conference as far as transportation goes. They didn't have, like they usually do, because this is the first time in 2 years we've had a meeting, they didn't have the electric cars and things out there like they normally show us. There was an electric delivery van that might be of interest to like Amazon or something like that, so that was kind of nice. Yesterday's meeting for SCAG, not too much from transportation went down. I do want to congratulate our commissioner here, Carmen Ramirez, our County Supervisor. She was voted in as the second Vice President of SCAG, so if she stays on the board, she will be the president in 2 years. So congratulations to her, and that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a quick clarification. I think I misspoke. We have CNG buses now, not electric buses, but our next wave of the future will be the hydrogen fuel cell. That's the route we're going to go instead of the electric buses. So, Ms. Rauschenberger, did I get it right this time? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioners. With respect to Metrolink, we have talked about Metrolink a little bit this morning, but I do want to bring up an item, and it actually relates to SCAG. At our board meeting on May 27, there was a, I will say, robust discussion and split vote by the Metrolink Board of Directors with respect to a proposed memorandum of understanding between SCAG and Metrolink under a REAP grant program for doing a housing develop, basically what they call the Regional Rail Station Area Housing Development Implementation Plan. That was SCAG identifying first 15 cities that might be interested in that program, and then 8 specifically to move forward on that. The discussion occurred principally along a number of lines, including A, whether there really needed to be an MOU between Metrolink on the one hand and SCAG on the other, since Metrolink is set up to run a railroad and SCAG is set up to plan for housing development. And there were a number of commissioners, Commissioner Chavez and myself included, who felt that an MOU was not necessary in this instance, and that the line of communication ought to be between SCAG and cities directly, as opposed to between SCAG involving MOU. I will say there was an awful lot of overtone on that in terms of tension between municipalities and SCAG relative to the RENA process, relative to SB 9, the entire local land use process. And for that reason, there was a split vote on the Metrolink board. Initially, the motion on the MOU did not pass. It was a 5-5-1 vote, with the abstention being Director Barger, who then changed her vote to yes, and the MOU was approved on a 6-5 vote. But the discussion was very spirited, and polite, but spirited in terms of whether or not that ought to go forward. So I thought I would make you aware of that as an additional item relative to Metrolink. And Commissioner Chavez, hopefully I covered that ground okay. All right. Thank you for that. Let's move to the Losan report. Vice Chair McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Losan is transitioning, in fact, we've already transitioned to a pet-friendly service. So if you would like to ride on the Losan train, you're welcome to bring your dog, your cat. And to try this out, I would encourage you that this weekend is the Oxnard Insect Festival, downtown Oxnard, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Grab your dog, your cat, your significant other, or any combination thereof. Jump on a Losan train, and other Metrolink services are following suit, and come to downtown Oxnard to learn everything there is about insects that you would ever want to know. And you can even have a slight meal of fried crickets, which I'm told in some cultures is a delicacy. I've yet to try them, but there's always a first time for everything. So, and that is my report for Losan at this point. We're still, like everyone else, struggling on how do we encourage people to get back in, and I think the opportunity to bring your pets with you will help us in that area. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I must confess one of the great regrets of my life, having gone to UC Davis, was never having taken an entomology class. But in any event, I'm sorry.
I just want to say I went to your last insect festival, and the grasshopper tacos are excellent. So I highly recommend them.
I think we have a foodie trend going on here. All right. Thank you. Coastal Rail Coordinating Council, anything on that?
I have no report, Mr. Chair.
All right. And then California Association of Councils of Government will defer on that because we don't have Commissioner Ramirez here. And on the Vanpool Authority, we also don't have Commissioner White here, except that he's probably out utilizing this bike map as we speak, hopefully. All right. That brings us to the end of our open session items. Let's move to item 16. And Mr. Mattis, would you provide us with the appropriate announcement on that matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have one closed session regarding the matter of Kohler versus Rancho Cini Recreation district and VCTC and others, and we expect this will be a brief closed session.
And just as a follow-up, Mr. Mattis, you don't expect any announcements coming out of closed session?
There may be one, but we would reflect it in the minutes so that it would be available for the public to see.
Okay, very well. Thank you very much. At this point, then, we will adjourn closed session and move into, did I say, we adjourn open session and move into closed session over in the conference room just off of Chambers. Thank you very much.